I remember the sound before the sight of it, coins clinking, like cold rain falling on the table. My father's voice followed, steady but hollow, as if the man who'd raised me had already left the room. "She'll work, she's strong," he said. And just like that, I was sold. They didn't even look at me when he took the gold. My mother's ring sat in his pocket, long pawned away, and I wondered if she could see from heaven how cheaply her daughter had been traded. I kept my eyes on the floorboards of that saloon, counting the cracks until the boots stopped in front of me, dusty, dark, and still. He didn't speak right away, just waited. Then, in a voice low as thunder rolling behind mountains, he said, "Let's go." That was how I met Cale Hunter, the outlaw they whispered about in every county west of Tucson. They said he'd burned down a ranch for revenge, that he'd shot a marshal clean through the badge. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But more than fear, there was shame. The kind that settles deep, where no prayer can wash it out. He led me out of town without another word. The wind carried the smell of dust and iron. My dress stuck to my skin from the heat. The sun felt like judgment. Every hoofbeat sounded like the echo of my family's betrayal. We rode for hours through the wasteland, rock, sagebrush, and silence. He rode ahead, never turning to look back. I watched his shoulders, broad, sunburnt, scarred, his posture more soldier than killer. There was a kind of sorrow in the way he sat the saddle, like the world had already taken more than it owed him. When the sky began to burn orange, he stopped near a dry creek and dismounted. "You can walk the rest," he said quietly, as if speaking to the wind. My legs trembled when I touched the ground. "You bought me," I muttered, barely meaning to say it aloud. His jaw tightened. "No," he said after a long pause. "I bought your freedom from a man who didn't deserve to keep it." I didn't believe him. Not yet. People don't spend gold without wanting something back. He handed me a tin cup of water from his saddlebag, then moved toward the horses again. "You drink, or you won't last the night." The cup was cool in my hands. When I looked up, he was lighting a small fire, using his coat as a windbreak. He didn't chain me, didn't threaten, didn't even glance my way. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the flames like he was counting sins. The silence between us grew heavy, thick as the desert night. Coyotes howled far off, and I pulled my knees close. My throat burned with all the words I wouldn't say, anger, fear, grief. He hadn't even asked my name, so I gave it anyway, to the dark. "Evelyn!" He didn't look up, but his hand paused over the fire. "Evelyn," he repeated, like testing the weight of it. Then softer, "You keep it then. Don't let anyone take it again." I didn't sleep that night. I watched him instead, this outlaw who'd paid for me but hadn't touched me, who carried guilt like a shadow stitched to his coat. When dawn broke pale over the ridges, he was already saddling the horses. "Eat," he said, tossing me a small biscuit. "We ride north." "To where?" "To where folks don't trade daughters for debts." His voice held no pity, no promise, just a quiet resolve that sank into me like warmth after frost. I didn't know if I trusted him, but for the first time since the gold changed hands, I felt something break free inside me. Hope, maybe. Or defiance. Either way, it had my mother's eyes and my father's silence, and it rode north with me into the rising sun. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind that's peaceful, but the kind that waits, like the world is holding its breath. His cabin stood alone against the ridge, rough timber and smoke-stained windows, a single lantern flickering behind torn curtains. The land around it was bare, stripped clean by wind and time. It didn't look like a home. It looked like punishment. Cale dismounted first, moving slow, careful, as if not to scare a ghost. "This is it," he said simply. "You can sleep inside." He left me standing in the doorway while he led the horses away. Inside, the air smelled of pine ash and leather. There was a small stove in one corner, a worn table with a broken leg, and a bedroll folded neatly near the hearth. Everything spoke of a man who needed little and trusted nothing. I sat on the edge of the table watching the door. Every creak of the floorboards made me tense. I didn't know what kind of man he truly was. He'd bought me. Whatever words he used, that truth lingered like smoke in my lungs. When he came back in, the lantern light caught the edge of his face, tired eyes, a scar along his jaw, the look of someone who'd seen too much of death and not enough of kindness. "There's stew," he said. "Not much, but it's hot." He filled a tin bowl and set it near me. Then he sat across the room, on the floor by the stove, eating in silence. I waited for the moment he'd ask something of me. Men always did, but he never did. After a long while, he spoke. "You think I mean to hurt you?" I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. "Don't you?" He shook his head. "I've done enough hurting for a lifetime." His voice carried no threat, just a tired honesty. He reached for a small bundle wrapped in cloth and tossed it toward me. Inside was a thin cotton dress and a comb. "Found those in town," he said. "Not much, but better than what you got." I looked down at my torn skirt. The dust and sweat caked on it. Still, pride made me stubborn. "You didn't have to." Maybe I did. The fire crackled between us, a sound both comforting and cruel. I didn't know how to thank him. I didn't know if I should. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind pressed against the walls, whispering through the cracks like a restless spirit. Cale sat near the door, rifle across his knees, head bowed. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the darkness outside like it was his penance. Near dawn, I heard him mutter something. A name, maybe. Then, quietly, he prayed. It startled me. A man like him asking forgiveness from a God he must have betrayed long ago. When morning came, I stepped outside. The air was cold, the sun pale behind a thin mist. The land stretched empty for miles. No road, no people, just sky. I turned back toward the cabin, expecting to see him watching me. But he wasn't. He was kneeling by the broken fence, mending it. That was when I noticed every nail he drove into the wood was done slow, precise, like building a confession instead of a fence. Later, when he handed me a cup of coffee, I asked the question that had been clawing at me since the first night. "Why me?" He looked past me to the horizon. Because no one else did. Something inside me shifted then. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The desert wind carried the smell of sage, the kind that burns slow and clean. And for the first time since I'd been sold, I didn't feel owned. I just felt alive. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But as I watched him repair that fence in silence, I had a strange thought. Maybe mercy could wear the face of a bandit. By the third week, the silence between us had changed shape. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was something softer, almost steady, like the hum of the wind that never stopped around his land. The mornings began the same way. He'd rise before the sun, boots heavy on the floorboards, the faint clink of the coffee pot the only sound in the gray light. I'd hear him step outside, always checking the horses first, then the fence, then the sky, as if the horizon itself might betray him one day. At first, I stayed inside, waiting for the day he'd remember why he'd bought me. But it never came. Instead, he left a cup of coffee for me each morning on the table, always before I woke, always without a word. I began to clean the place out of restlessness. The cabin had been built by rough hands and carried years of dust in its corners. There was something healing about wiping away what time had left behind. When I found a torn shirt folded in a drawer, I stitched it back together without thinking. He noticed, of course, though he said nothing. Only nodded once, eyes soft for the briefest second. That nod meant more than I wanted it to. One evening, while the sun bled orange across the ridges, I stepped outside and saw him at the well. He was trying to draw water, but the rope kept catching. His hands were raw from fixing fences all week. I walked over, wordless, and held the line steady. He looked up, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time. "But maybe I want to." We worked in silence, the bucket creaking as it rose, water shimmering like glass in the dying light. When it finally splashed over the rim, I caught myself smiling. He saw it too, and smiled back, small and fleeting, like a man who'd forgotten how. That night he cooked beans over the stove and handed me a bowl without asking. It wasn't much, but the act itself felt like a conversation we'd both been too afraid to start. I learned pieces of him in fragments. His careful way of folding his coat, the way he never turned his back on the open door, the scars along his wrists. Once I caught him tracing one absent-mindedly with his thumb, and when I asked, he said only, "Old debts." Sometimes, when the wind howled too loud, he'd sit by the fire with his head in his hands. And I, who'd once prayed to never see his face, found myself wishing I could ease whatever ghosts he carried. One morning he came in from outside, boots dusted white from the frost. Town's 2 days east, he said. Need supplies. You'll be safe here. Safe, I repeated, the word foreign and warm on my tongue. He hesitated at the door. You trust me yet? I looked at him for a long moment. The man who'd bought me, sheltered me, never once raised his hand. The outlaw who said little but lived gently. I'm trying, I said quietly. His lips curved, not quite a smile. That's all a man like me can ask. He left before noon, the wind rising behind him. I watched his figure fade into the dust, the echo of hoofbeats thinning until there was nothing left but silence again. Only this time, it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like waiting. I sat by the window long after sunset, sewing by lamplight. The thread trembled in my fingers, but the rhythm soothed me. I realized I wasn't fixing his clothes anymore. I was mending something else, something I'd thought was lost the day my father sold me. Trust. And though he didn't know it yet, when Cale Hunter came back through that door, I'd already decided I wasn't going anywhere. Cale said we had to go into town. The storm had torn half the fence apart, and we needed nails, salt, and flour. I hadn't seen another soul in months. Part of me longed for the sound of voices again. Another part, the wiser one, feared it. When we rode in, every sound seemed sharper. Wagon wheels grinding gravel, doors creaking open, spurs clicking on wood. I felt their eyes before I saw them, the way small towns always watch strangers, especially ones who look like sin and mystery. Cale dismounted first, tying the horses to a post outside the general store. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes. People whispered his name like a curse carried on dust. That's Hunter, someone muttered behind a stack of flour sacks. Thought he was hanged years ago. He's not alone, another voice hissed. Who's the girl? I stepped down carefully, skirts brushing the ground. The air was thick with judgment. I could feel it pressing against my back like heat. Cale walked ahead without looking at anyone, and I followed close, chin high. I told myself their words didn't matter. But shame has a way of crawling beneath the skin. Inside the store, the air smelled of tobacco and dried apples. The clerk froze when he saw us. What do you need? He asked, voice tight. Nails. Salt. Coffee. Cale said evenly. The man's gaze slid to me. And her? You trading again, Hunter? The words hit harder than I expected. The room went still. I felt my throat close, my face burning. Cale's jaw tightened. Watch your tongue, but the clerk only smirked. Didn't mean offense. Just figured she's the same one you... Before he could finish, Cale's hand slammed the counter. The noise cracked through the room like a shot. For a second, no one moved. Then his voice came low, cold. She's with me. That's all you need to know. He dropped coins on the counter, the sound of them sharp as the day I was sold. Then he turned and left. Outside, the whispers followed us like flies. Bandit's woman, someone laughed. Bought himself company. I kept walking, but each word cut deeper than the last. I wanted to shout, to tell them he'd never touched me, that he'd saved me. But my voice wouldn't come. I saw my reflection in the window, dust on my dress, wind in my hair, eyes full of tears I refused to let fall. Cale loaded the supplies onto the wagon in silence. I stood there, the crowd's laughter echoing behind me. Finally, I said, you should have told them the truth. He looked up, weary. Would it change anything? Yes, I lied. At least for me. He straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. I don't answer to them, Evelyn. Well, maybe I do, I said, the words breaking loose before I could stop them. You can live with their hate, but I'm the one they stare at. The one they call names. His eyes softened for just a breath, then went cold again. Then go if that's what you want. I froze. He didn't raise his voice, didn't beg, just said it like a man who'd already lost too much. I turned away before he could see my tears. The desert wind whipped around us, scattering the dust like ash. We rode home without speaking. When the cabin came into view, I gathered my few things, a comb, a dress, the mended shirt I'd sewn for him, and laid them on the table. He stood by the door, silent, a shadow in the dim light. I'll leave at dawn, I said. He nodded once. Then I won't stop you. The fire burned low, its glow trembling across his face. I wanted him to say something, anything, to break the silence that had suddenly become unbearable. But he didn't. When I stepped outside, the wind caught the edge of my shawl, lifting it like wings. Behind me, I heard the slow creak of the cabin door closing, and with it, something in me closed too. I left before sunrise. The air was cold and colorless, the kind that makes every sound echo twice. The world felt empty without his quiet presence. No boots on the floor, no kettle hiss, no voice breaking the morning stillness. Just wind and the ache of leaving. The desert road stretched like a wound beneath the pale sky. Each step away from the cabin felt heavier than the last. I told myself I was free again, that I was reclaiming the life my family had traded. But freedom felt a lot like loneliness. For days I drifted from one small settlement to another, sewing for a meal, cleaning for a coin. People still stared, still whispered. Once a rumor brands you, it sticks tighter than dust to skin. I learned to live beneath their eyes again, quiet, invisible, surviving. Then winter came early. One evening, I collapsed outside a church in a mining town. Fever burned through me, the kind that blurs the edges of memory. I remember the priest's face above me, pale and worried, his voice fading in and out. "Rest now, child," he said. "You're safe." Safe. I almost laughed. When I woke again, snow had fallen. The world outside the window was white and still, like it had stopped breathing. The priest said I'd been out for 2 days, and that a man had brought me in. A tall man, he said. Rugged, didn't give his name. Left before dawn. My heart knew before my mind did. I waited another day before stepping outside. The air cut sharp, but I followed the tracks in the snow, faint and half-buried. They led beyond the town, toward the ridge where the wind howled against the rocks. And there, half-shrouded by frost and fog, stood Cale Hunter. He turned when he heard my steps, his coat dusted white, breath rising in the cold air. "You should be inside," he said softly. "You found me." I never stopped looking. The silence between us carried everything we'd never said. I wanted to be angry, to remind him how he'd let me go. But the words melted before they reached my tongue. He looked older, wearier, like the time apart had carved the same hollow into him that I carried inside me. I didn't know where to go, I admitted. He nodded once. "Then come home," I hesitated. "And the others?" The names they called me. He took a step closer, pulling something from his coat, a folded piece of paper. "Sold the rest of my land," he said. "Brought what I owed your father. Every coin of it. There's no debt left between us." I stared at the paper, tears blurring the ink. "You didn't have to." "Maybe I did," he echoed my old words. Then, quieter. "So no one can ever say I bought you. Not now. Not ever." The wind rose, carrying flakes between us like ash and light. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw no guilt in his eyes. Only peace. We walked back toward the cabin together. The path was long, but it felt lighter with each step. When the roof came into view, I saw smoke curling from the chimney. He'd been keeping it ready, waiting. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. The mended shirt folded on the chair, the comb by the window, the quiet that no longer felt cold. Cale set his hat on the table and turned to me. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but you've got a place here if you want it." I took a breath, letting the warmth of the fire reach my hands. "Then I'm home." He smiled, small, real, the kind that carries years of silence behind it. Outside, the wind softened and sunlight spilled through the frosted glass. For the first time since gold changed hands, I felt whole again, not owned, not pitied, but chosen. And when Cale hung my shawl by the door beside his coat, I knew mercy had finally found its measure.